Here with us to discuss the Fiscal Policy Institution and the effects on the district's budget priorities are Ed Lazere, the Executive Director. Ed, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Kwame. It's really nice to see you.
No, it's always good to see you too. Welcome to the Always Real Talk set. You know how we do it here. We kind of just talk about what's real and what's going on. And as you know, it's budget time.
Yeah.
And you guys do a phenomenal work in terms of just making sure that the real priorities, and I'll say real for those everyday working people, they consider them real priorities that make their lives better. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the Fiscal Policy Institute and the work that you've been doing and how long you guys been around?
Yep. Well, so I was really honored 20 years ago almost to be the initial executive director of the DC Fiscal Policy Institute. It wasn't my idea, but I was allowed to be its leader from the beginning, from day one. And really, our mission is to recognize that budgets have a huge impact on all of our lives and whether we have a good quality of life in DC, but also really whether we're going to be able to tackle the biggest challenges and the biggest economic and racial inequities we have in the city. And that's sort of what we do. We try to become experts in the city's budget and understand the trends in things like unemployment and poverty and affordable housing, and then put those two together with information that's easy for policymakers to digest, easy for residents to use, and easy for advocates, so that we can fight for a budget that actually, again, makes sure that every child has a good school to go to, but also that we are really addressing the city's inequities and addressing the barriers that we know, particularly like kids of color face.
So let me ask you a question. At the beginning stages of the Institute being formed, who founded? How was it started? Walk us, because people know about the fiscal policy, but I don't think many people know how it originated and who was the founding members.
That's
Walk
a
us
great
through
question.
that.
So it's not a secret, but it's probably not that well known that we're actually part of a network of organizations. So almost 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, an organization called the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, which focuses on poverty at the national level, dealing with Congress and federal policy, decided that it wanted to nurture good progressive economic policy at the state level. So they created a network of organizations and helped funnel foundation money to them to support that work. So it's now called the State Priorities Partnership. Okay. DC Fiscal Policy Institute is one of those members. There are about 45 state-based organizations around the country. Of course, DC is not a state, but we should be. And that's why we're part of the State Priorities Partnership.
DC Statehood.
Yes. So the person who conceived of the DC Fiscal Policy Institute her name is Iris Lav. Mm-hmm. She helps support the network across the country, but she's been in DC her entire adult life, and she really wanted to make sure that there was a good economic progressive presence in DC. And so she did the initial fundraising, she hired me, and she let me take it from there. And it's changed my life.
And it's changed your life.
It's been a life-changing experience to be able to focus my energy and skills on making my adopted hometown a better place, because it's the only place I've lived as an adult was DC.
It's DC. Well,
yeah.
You know, the District of Columbia, DC, we're just a great city. But now, when it comes to the Institute itself, what are your priorities? Like, what do you see? I know you mentioned housing, you mentioned education.
Yeah.
Walk us through the core things that you are focusing on for this budget.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, in general, our mission is to use our energy and resources to focus on the biggest inequities in the city, the things that are holding families and holding children behind. And so we do start with a tremendous focus on housing and homeless services, a good focus on schools, and then on what we're doing to create jobs are sort of probably the three biggest buckets. You know, the city's always had an inadequate supply of affordable housing, but of course that has gotten terribly worse in the last 15 to 20 years as the city has prospered, as more people have wanted to live here, but that has pushed housing prices up to the point where there are 30,000 families who have very low incomes and spend more than half their income on housing every month. We know that those families are facing instability. The parents don't have time to focus on getting a job or maintaining a job as much as they would want, because they're just worried about paying their rent every month.
Now, you said it was 30%, they spend 30% of the income,
or
50% of the
more
income
than half every
on
month.
renting or owning or whatever. They
Yeah.
spend 50% of their income on that.
That's right.
And when you start to look at the housing inequities, where do you see the largest gap? Because you believe it's an inequity, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's walk us through what does that mean and how do you define inequity in the housing crisis that we're facing here in the city?
Well, if we go back, looking seriously historically, of course, the history of discrimination and racism in our country and in the city has meant that particularly black families in the city have not had the opportunity to gain the kind of wealth and have the home ownership rate and the wealth that comes from home ownership that white households have, leaving black families primarily to be in the renters market, and then subject to the whims of the renters market. What's happened as gentrification has swept across the city and created enormous increases in housing prices, leaving the lowest income families, the people who are on Social Security or cash assistance or in low-wage part-time jobs. Those are the folks who have the most severe problems.
I want you to hold that thought. We're going to come right back, but we want to talk about the definition of gentrification, because that's a word that's kind of out there. People use it, but people have different meanings for their own definition. Let's talk about that when we come back, and we'll be right back at Always Real Talk.